racial differences and whatnot. And if you're around kindergarten kids, they'll talk about, oh, you know, my best friend is the red kid, and you'll go, red? Yeah, he wears a red jacket, you know, that kind of thing. So he has no clue. They have no clue what's going on. As strange as that may seem, or not strange, I guess it's not that strange. Anyway, so everybody goes through the same process. It is age-related. It does tend to be age-related. When the younger you are, the less likely that you are to recognize the fact that there are different identities, different ethnic identities, and potentially you won't even start trying to figure out what's going on about your ethnic identity until you're a teenager, and you see that a lot. You see that a lot with African Americans. You see that a lot with Hispanics. You see that a lot with American Indians. Sometimes they don't even start thinking about it until they go to college. They don't think about their ethnic identity. That they don't recognize the difference between the different groups. If you grow up in select places, there really is no difference between one person and another. And in high school, of course, if you're a cheerleader, you're a cheerleader. If you're a football player, you're a football player. And nobody even thinks of whether you're black, white, red, or Hispanic, brown, I guess. So at this point, you're not really, it's not part of your self-concept. You really don't recognize it yet. And unfortunately, it's really easy to internalize negative stereotypes. And for this reason, they started producing dolls that are different ethnicities. Barbie has a new ethnicity. Is there a transgender Barbie now? I don't know. Anyway, there's a black Barbie, there's a Hispanic Barbie. But in the old days, of course, all these little girls wanted to play with the dolls, and the only dolls they had available to them were white dolls. So people that were of color had to play with white dolls, and sometimes they had negative stereotypes about themselves. Right around the adolescent period, the individual will go through ethnic identity search. They realize that they are different from somebody else. Maybe something has happened to them. Somebody has insulted them, or somebody has told them that they need to understand who they are. And at that stage, they will go through the ethnic identity search. They'll explore ethnicity through cultural events, through readings, hopefully. And there are lots of readings out there that you can do. Cultural events. With some groups, there are a lot of cultural events. American Indians tend to have lots of cultural events. If you think about it, African Americans really don't have that many cultural events to go to. They don't have powwows. They don't have ceremonies. So what do they do to identify themselves as African American? What can they do? Or Hispanics. How in the world is a Hispanic determined that they are Hispanic? What cultural events do they go to?
Last night I was watching Coming to America, and for black people they had a black awareness beauty pageant.
Ah, okay. Well, that happens every day.
Yeah. I know they have like a lot of stuff like Black Lives Matter kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah, maybe, but I mean that's fairly slipshod. It may happen or it may not happen. Maybe if you live in Chicago, that there are black events that you can go to. But if you live in, I don't know, in Arizona, what kind of black events do we have down here?
Or New Orleans.
New Orleans is kind of an interesting place. Okay. New Orleans is a very interesting place. New Orleans is a town where people have been mixing for an extended length of time. So, there are a lot of black events. The funeral ceremony is a celebration. They play jazz music. Jazz music itself is something of an event. But New Orleans is different in that New Orleans has supported interracial mixing for an extended length of time. Now you have to remember that interracial mixing used to be was against the law. It's known as miscegenation. It was against the law in Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. If you were black, you couldn't marry a white person, and vice versa, of course. But in New Orleans, all those laws were thrown out, and this mixing had been taking place for hundreds of years, but only in New Orleans. The rest of Louisiana is just as racist as the rest of the South, but New Orleans itself is a hotbed of racial tolerance, as confusing as that is. Okay.
Why would it be confusing?
Why would it be confusing? Because we have this one spot in the middle of the state where if you're black and white, you can marry, but in the rest of the state you can't. In the rest of the South, Arkansas, they're surrounded by states that will not allow black people and white people to marry, or at least that was the way it was for hundreds of years until the 1990s, 1990s. These laws were finally thrown out. And there's actually a movie about Virginia and the first couple that wanted to get married in Virginia. Something about love, I can't remember.
I have that movie.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, there you go.
I think it would be an amazing place if it's that kind of, tolerance. If you're
Right,
allowed to be biracial and
Right.
have no discrimination against.
but it's the only place.
I know, but it's amazing. It's
I
a
know,
place you
I know. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. And there are a lot of people that hate New Orleans. They hate New Orleans because, well, they believe in racial separation. But they believe that, white people are too good to have anything to do with black people.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's fairly common in the South. I don't have a sign-up board today, so don't worry about it. I forgot I left it downstairs. I was talking to somebody and but I'll sign you. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Okay, so now all of a sudden as adolescents or maybe pre-adolescents, it really all depends on the area that they live in and the necessity to maintain your ethnicity as to when they start the ethnic identity search. They may reject anything dealing with the dominant culture, and at this stage they become hostile to the dominant culture. And of course we see this, of course I've seen this because I lived through the civil rights era. But before, of course, you have African Americans who, well, let me give you an example. You have an African American who goes to school at a white school. Everybody treats him about the same as they treat everybody else. They don't tell him that he's black. They don't treat him like that he's any different from anybody else. All of a sudden, something happens to him. He's away from his high school. He's away from his home, and somebody refers to him using the N-word, and then all of a sudden he realizes that he's different. Or he doesn't think about it, and he tries to use a restroom that he's not supposed to use. Or somebody tells him he can't use a select restroom. And all of a sudden he realizes this kind of shit happens all the time. I said that on my hand.
Isn't that what happened to Emmett Till?
Yeah. So all of a sudden he realizes that he's different, and he never thought about it before. He kind of knew it, but he didn't really have to deal with it. Now all of a sudden he's been insulted and embarrassed, and now he's going to have to deal with it. So he decides that he's going to start acting black and looking black, and of course these all become, he uses the stereotypes too. He starts acting in a stereotypical fashion, in a negative stereotypical fashion. He grows a big afro and starts wearing a dashiki, and you don't know what it is. It's an African shirt. And it comes down halfway down to your knees. Yeah, no, it's a dashiki.
It's a thing.
Yeah, it's just a thing. It's just some clothes. So, and he starts, giving that black power symbol every time somebody says something that he doesn't like. And he thinks of himself in these terms. So he starts arguing with people when they don't recognize the fact that he's black. or they don't acknowledge the fact that he's black. So all of a sudden he wants everybody to start treating him like he's a black man. And of course, when I was in college, I saw this over and over and over again. A lot of these kids went to white high schools, and a lot of the African American individuals that I was rooming with, they went to white high schools, so they didn't really start thinking of themselves as black until they came to college. And in college, they tried to get into fraternities, and the fraternities were segregated, so they couldn't get in. So they all had to, they had to live in the dorms instead of living in fraternity houses. Okay, so now all of a sudden they become part of the civil rights movement. So they reject the dominant culture. Anything that's white about them, they start speaking with a black patois. So anything that makes them seem white, they reject, including their white friends, which was really kind of a curiosity. They're angry. They're angry because somebody has made them aware that they are black, made them aware that they are different, and they don't like it. So they reject anything that's white. Eventually, of course, the more that they live in this world, the more they realize everybody has to live together. We can't separate ourselves from other individuals, because this guy's nice to me. He was never mean to me. Why in the world am I treating him like he's my enemy when he's not my enemy at all? He wants to help me in any way he can. So eventually they achieve ethnic identity. They appreciate their own ethnic heritage, and at the same time they accept the fact that other individuals have to live their ethnic heritage as well. I know. So eventually they mature, and eventually they lose their hostility, and eventually they accept their own position, and they internalize beneficial values while separating self from damaging aspects of group identity. So they stop acting in a stereotypical fashion, and they start acting like themselves. And they realize that they need to be authentic. They need to be themselves. They need to be who they are. Okay. Now they can have white friends. Before they couldn't have white friends. Now suddenly they can. And it's an internalizing process. It's a maturing process. So if you ever run into this, and I hope you've never have, but if you've ever run into this, of course, somebody was your friend, then all of a sudden they didn't want to be around you anymore. It's really fairly hurtful. Okay, so ethnic identity, and we can map this with a lot of different people, with a lot of individuals. Some individuals, they will get into their adult years without realizing their ethnic identity. As confusing as that is. And actually, let's see, can I talk about this? Sure, why not? Okay, remember the AIM movement. The AIM movement. One of the things that happened to American Indians during World War II and after World War II, the federal government was looking for workers. They were also trying to break up the reservations. This is another thing that they were trying to do. Republicans are always trying to break up the reservations for no reason whatsoever. Who knows what the hell's going on in Republicans' minds. Anyway, so during the 1950s, one of the things that they did was they would go onto the reservations and they would offer people jobs. They would move them if they moved to Oakland, California, or San Diego, or someplace. So there was this huge movement on the reservations to move the people off the reservation, so that they could become factory workers, or they could do this, or they could do that, or the other. So a lot of the individuals that I befriended up in Montana, they had been moved off the reservation to Oakland. They all moved to Oakland, and one of them was a welder in the shipyard, and another one worked for Xerox. He fixed Xerox copying machines. you know, just all kinds of stuff. They became secretaries and whatnot. They moved them off the reservation. So a lot of these individuals, of course, had a difficult time with their ethnic identity. They lost their ethnic identity because as adolescents and adults, they had moved into a white community. And a lot of them lived together because they didn't feel safe, you know, around people that weren't like them. But a lot of these individuals went through this process as adults. And then they moved back to the reservation. A lot of them moved back to the reservation. I can't remember what my point was. It was something, I can't remember what it was. Anyway, they moved back. So they raised their children in a white community, and not only in a white community, but there was nobody else around them that were like them. There were no other natives around them. They lived literally in places where they were the only Indians around. So the native kids had a difficult time accepting their ethnicity because they didn't know what it was. As sad as that is.
There was a documentary of something like that, and some of these natives that were around these urban areas and certain areas, they would establish the powwow.
Right.
And that's how they
Correct.
kind of exchange culture.
Right. Yeah. But you have to remember, they're not just moving Grovans and Lakota, they're also moving Blackfeet and Cheyenne, and so the powwows, which used to be very singular, a Cheyenne powwow is not anything like anybody else's powwow. All of a sudden, you've got, you know, one Cheyenne family and a Grovan family and a Blackfeet family, and of course, and Sioux, and of course Sioux's everybody's enemy, or Crow, you know, so they're all out there. And so they have to create a powwow, and they've got, you know, so it becomes an amalgamation of all these ideas about powwows. As long as they didn't have somebody that wanted to dance backwards, they were okay.
And then when you move to Seattle or you go over to those tribes over there, you know, a lot of them have lost their identity.
Oh, yeah.
Their ethnic identity, and so they're doing everything they can to become native.
Right.
You know, and so they're having these powwows, and they just, because they've been in the city so long, they just can't grasp it. And,
Exactly.
And they're the fish Indians too, you know,
Right.
so they have a totally different culture, and it's really hard to be a Native American living in Seattle.
No, you're right. Yeah, they ate a lot of fish. These individuals ate a lot of fish, and that's yeah. They were the other side of the mountain Indians. I can't even think of anybody. Coeur d'Alene were on this side.
Like the Tlingit,
Yeah, right.
all the Alaskan natives,
Yeah,
you know.
all those guys.
The ones where you have to take a ferry over from Seattle just
Right.
to get to the reservation.
Right.
They would actually pay my family to do powwow dances.
Right.
To show them, you know, and
Exactly.
be like, okay, and then they'd have a huge salmon fest.
Right. They have potlatches where they give things away. That's part of their tradition is potlatches. Okay, so now I remember what I was talking about. I was talking about Ain, remember? Okay, so a lot of these Indians were moved off the reservation. It was either World War II or it had to do with defense factory work, or they were just relocated, and they referred to it as the relocation. So there were a lot of these individuals that came up, they grew up as they were Indians, but they were not, they didn't know their own culture. So we had all these urban Indians that had been moved out to California, and all of a sudden they decided with the civil rights movement, the American Indians decided, you know, we're getting screwed too. We need to do something about this, and that's where the AIM movement came from. But most of it was led by these individuals that were urban Indians. They didn't understand their own culture. So one of the things that happened during the AIM movement, I mean, you had people coming off the reservation that were supporting it, but you also had all these urban Indians coming in, and they had no clue what their ethnicity was. They had no clue what their traditions were, because you know they were never taught any of this stuff. So they started this whole movement toward pan-Indianism, It's just, yeah, Pan Indians, which is really kind of fascinating if you think about it. And of course, it was successful to some extent, and it was unsuccessful to some extent. Part of the problem was that you know, you mix reservation Indians with urban Indians, and all of a sudden you got conflict, and the conflict created, you know, leadership problems. And that's one of the reasons why AIM only lasted for a couple of years, because they got into all kinds of trouble. They started murdering people. I mean, it got really odd. It didn't murder that many people, but people started dying. The federal government, or the FBI came in, and they were going, you know, your people are giving you money, and you're just spending it on, you know, Las Vegas and stuff. So there was a lot of that taking place. So as adults, they were going through this whole process. Most of them were here. They were still seeking their identity. And eventually, of course, some of them did find their identity. Who's the one that I'm thinking of? Dennis Banks, the guy that became the actor. He was in, I don't remember, he's in a couple different movies. Anyway, Dennis Banks, he was really angry a lot of the times, but he didn't understand his culture. He just didn't understand his culture, and he was trying to learn it.
Vance Banks, Robert Trudell.
I don't know.
Russell.
It's Russell Means. I'm sorry, it was Russell Means, not Dennis Banks. Dennis Banks came from the reservation, and he moved back to the reservation.
I think Dennis Banks is my dad's friend,
Oh.
and he married a Navajo lady.
Oh, did he?
Mm-hmm. And this was back in 1995. He was living on the Blackfeet Reservation for a while, but you're right, he was part of the AIM movement.
Right, big
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, and then I think he just kind of became like a hustler.
Yeah, he's pretty much a hustler the whole time. But okay, maybe he has since passed away. So, well, I guess.
Did he?
Yeah, he died a couple of years ago. Yeah, he was a hustler the whole way through. But then again, he came out of Oakland.
Well, see, back in the north area, everybody thinks, oh my God, you know, be careful what you say on the phone, you know, this is when my grandma was
Right.
alive, and she'd be like, be careful what you say. The FBI or CIA are
Right.
all listening in, you know, because of the whole AIM movement.
Oh, sure.
So everybody up north was really like paranoid
Oh,
and
sure.
everything. So back in 1995, I had a really bad giving birth to my daughter, and Dennis Banks was around. And my dad was like, oh, well, he's affiliated with the American Indian movement. He can help you file a lawsuit and all this, you know, and everything. And then we gave him all the paperwork, and then he just took off, you know, and we never seen him again.
That sounds like Dennis. Yeah, he was a piece of work. Anyway, yeah. So and there were a lot of lawyers, and a lot of individuals became lawyers, and of course, part of the time they were working for the movement, and part of the time they were just working for themselves. So that they were making a lot of money, and of course they became identified with the movement, but they didn't really help the movement very much. And it kind of fell through because there were a lot of these urban Indians, and a lot of them were using the movement just to advance themselves. You know, it was kind of an ugly situation. Anyway, okay, so there was a lot of that taking place. That's the point I'm trying to make. They were, you know, this ethnic identity was taking place as adults. These individuals were trying to find themselves. And if you remember the commercial about, I don't know, 23 and Me, that lady that says, oh, I'm 26% American Indian. I'd like to find out more about myself, or what's the problem. Yeah, this lady's
That's a
like,
teeny thing.
yeah, she's like 50 years old. Like she's going to start dancing at powwows or something. I don't know. Have all of her kids grow long hair and braids and whatnot. Okay. Just, and buy pots, you know, go and buy these pots out all over the place. Yeah, okay. Strategic self-presentation. So we all have a self-presentation. We all present ourselves in one way or another. I present myself today. I'm in Hawaiian garb because I am honoring our Hawaiian brothers and sisters. That's why I wear it, because today's the last day of lecture and I get the weekend off. So I'm going to go and rest.
He's gonna go fly to Ohio.
I'm going to go take a nap. Strategic self-presentation is a process of presenting the self in a particular way that shapes others' impressions. So here I've got a jacket on. I hope that impresses everybody. It's a sports coat. This is my garb almost every day. I know. I'm hoping to impress everybody. Of course, I have to get up and get dressed every morning. I don't have my wife to tell me, oh, don't put those two colors together. You can't do that. And of course, I'm a guy, and so I don't see any of this stuff. So I have to self-regulate. I have to get up in the morning and I have to put on the right clothes. If I wear blue pants, I have to wear black shoes. It's the rule that I have. I know, but I can wear blue jeans with tennis shoes. These are running shoes, of course. So it requires self-regulation. Failure in self-presentation leads to embarrassment, of course. If you came to my house on a Saturday afternoon, you never know, I might have a ripped up t-shirt and I've got soot all over my face because I've been playing with the fire and whatnot. So it requires, if you don't look the way you think you're supposed to look, then of course you become embarrassed. It becomes automatic with practice, all the self-regulation that we do. You all have a presentation. This is something that we all do. It's very strict in high school. In high school, you don't want to dress any differently than everybody else. You don't want to act any differently than everybody else. As you become adults, you don't care as much, but you still have friends that you're trying to impress. I'm guessing. I don't have any friends, but if I had friends, then I would try to impress my friends. The only friends I have are you guys, so there you go. I'm trying to impress you guys with the clothes that I wear. It becomes automatic. Eventually it becomes automatic. My wife knows what I look like. Okay. My hair all sticking all out. Bedhead, you know that. Okay. That's me. She took a selfie yesterday for the first time.
Yes.
I know, isn't that exciting? It was Valentine's Day. And I sent her roses. We promised each other we weren't going to give each other anything for Valentine's Day. But I cheated and I sent her some roses and some strawberries. So, chocolate-covered strawberries. I know, I cheated.
It's very sweet.
I don't know. I have ulterior motives. She knows I have ulterior motives. I've always got ulterior motives. She knows that I'm after something. You know how guys are. They're always after something. They never do anything just to be nice, do we? Do we ever do anything just to be nice?
Sometimes.
That's extremely rare. In great, common types of self-presentation, there's some people are flatterers. They make you sick if you're around these individuals because they're always trying to flatter the person that's above them. So they're flatterers. They try to ingratiate themselves. It works with some select individuals. One individual that if you compliment him, he likes you, that's the president. Donald Trump likes people to say nice things about him. Because if they don't, then he'll say nice things about himself. Didn't he call himself a genius? Who calls themselves a genius? Who calls themselves a genius? Who tells the whole world that he's a genius? Who does that? Donald Trump, evidently. Okay. So and he just loves people that compliment him. He's put people in his administration that, my God, they don't. Well, the guy that they just fired, Robert Porter, couldn't get a security clearance because he was a domestic abuser. And they told the Trump administration in March of last year that they couldn't give him a security clearance, and he probably would never get one because he was a domestic abuser. Now, why in the world would that disqualify him from getting a security clearance? Do you understand why it disqualifies you?
Because he's a violent offender, and to be in the White House, you have to have a good, clean record in order to work with the people. Kind of like working with social working children.
It's not exactly the same thing. You can be the biggest jerk in the world and work in the White House, obviously, because this guy's one of the biggest jerks in the world. And he worked in the White House, and nobody said anything about it. All these people knew that he had been accused of being a domestic abuser, not by his first wife, but by both of his ex-wives and his girlfriend. Not his girlfriend now, of course. So why is it that being a domestic abuser would disqualify you from a security clearance? Because it's easy to bribe you. It's easy to turn you. So a spy could come in and say, hey, look, we're going to disclose all this information to the people of the United States if you don't give us this information. Yeah. In the old days, if you were gay, if you were homosexual, then they kicked you out of the military. They wouldn't let you in the government. They took away your security clearance. Why? Because you were easily turned. You were easily bribed. And that's the reason why. Anyway, but he stayed in there for an extended length of time because Trump liked him. Because he complimented Trump. He told Trump what he wanted to hear. That's all you need. You just need to tell him what you want, what he wants to hear. Another common type of self-presentation is modesty. It increases likability. People like you when you're modest. But unfortunately, the more modest you are, I mean, if you're not telling people the things that you can do, then they don't recognize your competence, your level of competence. So people tend to put you back, set you back someplace. If you think about the leaders that we have, how many modest leaders do we actually have? And the answer is none. None. That's not the person we select as a leader, the modest person. That person becomes second in command or third in command, but we certainly don't put them in command. And these individuals, and the reason is because we don't understand their level of competence. Another individual that is another type of self-presentation is self-promotion. It's used when competence is highly valued. So these individuals brag all the time. A good example would be Scaramucci. I don't know if you remember Scaramucci. He worked for Trump for 24 days. He set a record for being fired. No, it wasn't even that long, was it? he said such stupid things. Oh, so why in the world was Scaramucci even allowed in the White House? Because he bragged about stuff all the time. He complimented Trump, but he talked about how wonderful he was and how he was going to change things. Well, that's how Trump got elected. He's going to build the wall. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. He's going to do all of these things. And that's how he got elected, through self-promotion. And people ate that stuff up. There were a lot of people that hated Hillary Clinton. Maybe they hated her because she was female, but probably they hated her because she had been around for such a long time. And there were so many different targets on her back. Why didn't she leave Bill when Bill had the affair with Monica Lewinsky? There were Benghazi. You know, they started tagging her with all of these things. And so it was very difficult for people to like her. Exemplification, show your integrity and moral worthiness. That's another type of self-presentation. Some individuals are intimidators. In other words, they threaten you. Yeah, you know, if you don't do what I want you to do, then I'm going to beat you up. Or I will hurt you in one way or another. Intimidation. Most of us hurt ourselves. We self-handicap. This involves placing obstacles in the way of one's own performance in order to protect or enhance our self-concept. You see this all the time. I think I told you the story about when we actually set the school record when I was in high school. We're standing up there, it's the mile relay, and before a mile relay, if you've ever seen one of these things, they line you up on the starting line. Everybody is in their lanes, and they line you up on the starting line. And so you've got all four of your runners are standing right there. Of course, the exchange is on the starting line anyway, so we're all standing right there. And we were in the 7th lane, and the guy was standing on the infield, and he was trying to identify all the teams. We were so short that they couldn't see us. They didn't know that we were there, so we almost got disqualified because we're so tiny. Literally, I mean, runners. Some runners are really tall people, and this was like a group of 6-footer pluses. Some of them were 5'10", but we were 5'6". I was the tallest one on the team. Now it would be very easy for me to go, or for anybody on the team to go, I'm too short to run this race. All these people are taller than we are. They went to bigger schools than we did, and actually that kind of happened. The first two runners. After the first lap, we were in 9th place out of 10 teams. And then the second runner, we were in 7th or 8th place. And then the third runner, we were still in 7th place. Is that right? No, we were in 6th place when I got the baton. And of course, I've been short all my life, okay? I've been taking on taller people all my life, so it didn't really bother me that all these people were taller. If I thought about it, all these people had actually placed in the 440, and I didn't place in the 440. So all these people had actually beaten me before, and here I take the baton, and I passed 4 guys and came in 3rd. Okay, anyway. But I could have self-handicapped, just like the first 2 runners did. I'm too short to run, We're a tiny little school, and we're running against the biggest school in the state, that kind of stuff. But, they did, I didn't, because I didn't care. That was my last race anyway. It was my last race, my last high school race. I ran in college as well. Anyway, so we place obstacles in our way. We could have used that as an excuse. We're tiny, we can't beat anybody because we're so small. We can't beat anybody because, we're Daleville. We're between Muncie and Anderson. And we were running against a team from Muncie and a team from Anderson. Anyway, so we self-handicap. We do this all the time. An individual's idea of who they are defines their self-concept. We have schemas or mental frameworks that individuals use to organize and categorize their world. Well, this whole self-concept, this idea of who I am and who I'm going to be, that becomes part of your schema of self. So we have these self-concepts, and we maintain these. Who am I? Who am I going to be? What have I done in my life? Can I succeed? And if you tell yourself you can't succeed, then guess what? You're self-handicapping yourself. If you don't think you can succeed, there's no way in hell that you're going to be successful. So you have to convince yourself that I can do this. And it's not always easy, because sometimes you're going up against people that are very, very bright, or they look good, or there's something about them. I have a friend from Bangladesh. I have a student from Bangladesh. We're trying to get him back in the United States. He's been admitted to 3 different graduate schools, and he has to decide which one he wants. But part of the problem is that he's going to be going up against kids that are American. And he's got to convince himself that he can do it. So that's what's going on right now. We keep Skyping, and he keeps telling me about how this poor kid from Bangladesh, how in the world am I ever going to make it? Well, if that's his self-concept, then he's not going to make it.
You know what? I met a guy from Africa this weekend, from West Africa. He came here, he wanted to have a tour of the college and everything.
Sure.
So he was telling me if I would have known that Jamaica College was this cheap when I went to school, I would have came here. So he started out at Marquette, Colorado State, Boise, Idaho, Washington, and somewhere else, I forget. But anyway, This guy is a PhD doctor
Mhm.
working in court defiance, and he has 3 masters and 1 PhD. 3, and 1 is in psychology too. You know,
What does he do in Fort Defiance, do we know?
He's a pediatrician.
Oh, so he's got an MD.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. He's like,
Wow.
he's just, you know, and you look at him and you're like, you're so young, you know, and you let people say, or people, you hear him say, oh, I can't do it, I can't do it, but then you look at him, he came from a place where he didn't even know English.
Right.
And, you know, so tell your friend,
He can do it. I tell him that every time I talk to him, that he's going to be fine. He's brilliant. He's a mathematician. He's got all this information, and yeah, he should be able to do it. But he has to convince himself. Me telling him that's not going to do any good. He has created his own self-concept. He has his own schemas in his mind. When he first came to the United States, he's a Muslim, of course, and he had ideas that were that rejected Americans. He didn't like. He thought that American women were sluts, not the right word. I can't think of a better word. I don't know. They dress too provocatively, and he said I'd never have anything to do with an American woman. And of course, he didn't have anything to do with an American woman, mainly because he looked at them negatively. Why in the world would anybody want to date him if he looked at them negatively? Anyway, so he's changed 180 degrees. He's turned around completely. Now he wants to come back to the United States, and I don't know if we can get him back here. Now all of a sudden they're offering him stipends. You know, you got to survive, and he's got no money. So they're offering him things like $18,000 a year, $16,000 a year, and he's going, well, if I have a car and I have to buy insurance, and they make me buy health insurance, then I'm only going to have, you know, and he's a mathematician, so he works all this stuff out in his head. And he says, oh, I'll be living on ramen noodles, you know. And he's going to talk himself out of coming back to the United States, eventually. So now I'm working on, well, maybe you can get a part-time job to feed your car and feed yourself. Schemas are the mental frameworks that we maintain when we think about ourselves. For example, if we see ourselves as athletic, then not only will this be our definition of ourselves for ourselves, but it will influence what we focus on in ourselves and in others. It's really kind of interesting. I've been an athlete all my life, and I still see myself as an athlete despite the fact I'm 68 years old. I'm really too old to be doing this stuff. I keep hurting myself. I need to slow down. I can't outrun all the kids anymore. But I still see myself as an athlete, and I take I subscribe to a magazine called Runner's World, where these people are talking about running a marathon and running a half marathon and improving their time. And of course, I'm just need to get out there and make sure I finish the race. Okay, I don't need to improve my time or run a marathon. I could never run a marathon anyway. My knees would never take it. Anyway, but I see myself as an athlete. So all the things I do, and when I look at people, I look at them to see how physically fit they are. It's just the way I do things. It's just the way my brain works. And this is part of my schema, is the fact that I see myself as an athlete, despite the fact that I recognize the fact that I'm not really an athlete as compared to other individuals. I certainly can't compete with my son. He's still a bodybuilder, so he has probably 5-6% body fat. I've got 12-14% body fat. So how in the world could I ever compete with my son? The answer is I can't. People tend to process information and remember information related to themselves more readily than any other information. So if somebody says something about you, you're going to remember it. If somebody gives you information about Sigmund Freud, yeah, you'll probably forget it, who cares? Or anybody else, but information about you goes right into your long-term memory. This is known as self-reference effect. Anything that has to do with you, you remember. For most people, the most important thing to them is themselves. And that's one of the things that you have to remember. I've insulted everybody in abnormal psychology class by reminding you that you refer to yourselves as the people. Right? Or whatever. Travis and I have had this conversation afterwards, and I still got it wrong. Blackfeet, what do you guys call yourselves? What's the real word that you don't, Blackfeet's not the word.
Penny,
Yeah, okay. And it means
the road people.
the road people. So if you're the road people, who were the other people?
I don't know. But we refer to ourselves as the real people.
The real people, exactly. And of course, the Comanche call themselves the people as well. And the Nez Perce call themselves the people as well. And, all these different tribes refer to themselves as the people. Meaning, if we're the people, what does that make everybody else? Not the people, okay? Anybody else, they're anybody else. When I came here, I assumed that I was going to have conversation. I assumed I'd have students that were Apache. I just assumed that. But see, look at the look on your face. I assumed that I would have students who were Hopi. It was like Fort Belknap. Fort Belknap, I had students from all different tribes. Of course, they've got a lot of different tribes on the reservation. But it's not the same here. Everybody's Navajo, aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, except for she's.
And there are a couple of African students.
And a couple African students. There we go. Okay, so we got a Blackfeet and a couple African students. There we go. That's it. But
we also have people from Asia that are here.
Really?
We have one that's from Thailand.
Okay.
We have one that's from Haiti.
Okay.
We have a lot of mixed Navajo. I wouldn't
Right.
say everybody's full.
Right. No,
Navajo,
I didn't mean that.
Yeah.
Okay. But you have to learn the Navajo language, of course, and that's okay. That's good. And we're going to talk about that in a second, I think. Research done where, okay, so my point is, and the point I was trying to make in abnormal psychology class, is that people separate themselves from other individuals. And we have a self-concept. And that's known as the self-reference effect. But the reality is, of course, so by focusing on just your group, what does that do to other people? Where does that put the Apache? Where does that put the Hopi? Where does that put the Blackfeet? Where does that put the Grover? Where does that put anybody else?
It just puts them over there.
It puts them over there, exactly. It does, exactly. Now, if you think about it, there are a lot of people that have done that kind of thing. I mean, if we look at the European settlement in the United States, the first people that really settled successfully settled were the Dutch or the Spanish. We'll forget all about the Spanish, but the Dutch in the Northeast. And then the English came in and conquered the Dutch, and then there were Swedes there as well. So, and all of these people, they segregate themselves. That's where the word ghetto comes from. They segregate themselves. So there was a Dutch settlement here, there was an English settlement here, there was a Swedish settlement over here. And we do that kind of stuff. And of course, the indigenous peoples have done exactly the same thing. You guys are the people between the four mountains, right? You have the four sacred mountains? Okay.
It was like that in high school. A majority of my high school is Navajo kids.
Okay.
And the girls who were half black, they hung out with the Navajo girls because they were cool.
Okay.
And then the white kids just kind of had their own island,
There
There
you
was
go.
all white kids in
There you
there.
go.
And then like the half white kids just wanted to stay with the white kids.
Yeah,
And they
okay,
just
there
kind of
you-
had their own thing
Kind
going
of
on.
shoving everybody off into the corners. Okay.
Yeah.
The white kids over there. Okay. If you're partially black.
The half black girls they were cool, the Navajo girls. They didn't
Okay.
have anything against them. They joined volleyball.
Isn't that strange?
They were cool, but the white people were just like, no.
Yeah, we're different.
over
We're
here."
separate. We're going to
Yeah.
separate ourselves. Self-reference effect, and this takes place. High school is the worst time in the whole world is high school, because everybody's segregating themselves. Research done where individuals were singled out by having them wear clothing that they weren't used to showed, they felt as if everyone was watching them, and this is known as the spotlight effect. I was talking to one of my colleagues yesterday. He developed a cold sore. And of course, you'd have to get right up in his face to see it, okay? But, and nobody's getting right up in the guy's face, but, he thought, he kept covering his mouth because he was afraid that people would see his cold sore. Well, you can't see it from, a foot away, so nobody knew it but him. But because he had that cold sore, he thought that that's what everybody was looking at. So when they were looking at his face, he was assuming they were looking at his lip, even though you couldn't see it unless he told you that it was there. It was one of those kind of deals. But he assumed everybody knew that he had that cold sore. As stupid as that is.
And every time girls mess with their eyebrows, are like,
oh my God, don't look at my eyebrows.
like you're like, what? There's
I got
nothing wrong with it.
I got a haircut last week. She butchered me. I'll tell you what. She just shaved my head. And you know how much I care? None. I know, there's something wrong with me. I'm 68 years old. What do I care what I look like? I got a bald spot on top anyway, as long as my wife's not around. She hates short hair. All the guys had short hair in the military, so she hates short hair. She wants me to grow my hair out, but my hair only grows down to a certain point, then it flips up. I hate that flip up look, I don't know. Anyway, future us's, an individual's self-schema does not only include who they are, but who and what they would like to be or fear we might become. And these are our possible selves. So anytime you're thinking of, I don't know, shoplifting at Walmart and you're going, well, I'd hate to pay $35 for this. It's only worth like $5. Why don't I just put it in my pocket? And of course you're not going to do it. And the reason you're not going to do it is because you're afraid somebody's going to see you and you're going to get arrested. And all of a sudden, this possible self that you have is the person in jail, is the person that has been put in prison. And that's one of your possible selves. It is this vision of who we would like to be, and who we could possibly become that drives us forward. You may see yourself as a PhD, and I think that's wonderful. You need to have this vision of yourself as a successful individual. And you need to maintain that. That's one of your possible selves. You're not there yet. You're still working on your bachelor's degree. But eventually you may get that PhD. You may become Sarah Kine 2 or something. Sarah Kine 2 or Sarah Kine 3, Sarah Kine 4. Okay, you may become... Yeah, you may become that individual, and I think that's wonderful. Just having that idea, the idea of who you're going to become and the person that you're actually going to become, completely different. I finished my PhD and I thought this is the most wonderful thing in the world. Everybody's going to call me Dr. Bradway. Well, nobody calls me Dr. Bradway. I don't want you to call me Dr. Bradway. That separates me from everybody else, and I don't want to be separated from my students. You need to feel like I'm somebody that you can talk to. I'm not the bastard that makes you call me by my position rather than my name. Anyway, so this is the thing that drives us, keeps us going. This is the thing that keeps moving us forward. This self-concept, this possibility of who we're going to be. And of course, who we are going to become is nothing compared to who we actually will become. And that's okay. We don't see any of the hard things. We don't see any of the bad things. When I was in the military, they asked me if I would go to medical school. And as much fun as that would have been, I would have loved to have been a doctor. That would have been so much fun. I didn't do it. And the reason I didn't do it was because I projected into the future. And at the time, I was a single parent. And in order for me to go to medical school, what the hell would I have done with my kids? I wouldn't have been able to spend any time with my kids, and I knew that. I watched doctors, and I watched doctors interact with their children. And I knew that they didn't have enough time to spend with their kids. Their time was not their own. And I realized that if I became a doctor, despite the fact that it would put doctor in front of my name, MD behind my name, despite that fact, and I would be highly prestigious, I would have to sacrifice my children in order to do it. So I didn't do it. Because I projected what my possible self. And I didn't do it. And sometimes I think about it and go, oh man, I wish I was a doctor. I could be doing this and that. I'd have all this money, you know, that kind of thing. But the reality is, my kids are far more important to me than my own prestige. Or saving people's lives. I'll save people's lives some of them. Anyway. Yeah, you don't have to chop up your in-laws. That's my idea.
I thought that was hilarious.
Sorry. I've been married 3 times and my in-laws have all been really bad people, okay? Not the nicest people in the world. How in the world do I ever get tangled up with somebody who's so nice, but whose parents are so bad? I don't know. I've had one good in-law, and that was my he died a long time ago, but it was my father-in-law, and he was a nice guy. His wife was a raving lunatic. Okay. Yeah.
You know, I heard this theory, or not this theory, I heard this thing the other night that all women are crazy, raging lunatics, you know. And I know we're not all crazy, raging lunatics, you know, but you always hear that, you know, and like, I wonder why people think women are so crazy in the head.
If we want to talk about crazy, raging lunatics, we need to talk about these people that keep shooting everybody.
Oh, I know.
Aren't they all guys? Aren't they all white? White guys, okay. I think. I don't know what this kid's name is. I don't know if he's Hispanic or not. He's probably white. I'm betting he's white.
White.
Is his last name Cruz?
Yeah.
C-R-U-S-E or C-R-U-Z? Z? Okay, so he could be Hispanic. Okay.
Tom Cruise.
No, he's USC.
And it's 18 school shootings in this year alone, and it's only February.
It's only February. 17 dead, that's a lot of dead people. Self-discrepancy theory. 3 aspects of self-concept. We have our actual self that we are, our ideal self, the person that we want to be, and our ought self, the person that we should be. This is kind of has to do with religion. Religion tells us who we ought to be. What would Jesus do? Okay, there you go. That's who we ought to be. We ought to be, you know, Jesus incarnate on the earth. But our ideal self is potentially the guy that won the lottery. I don't know, the guy that won $35 million. That's the person we would like to be. Maybe we wanted to be a little rock star. Maybe, I don't know who your ideal self is or what your ideal self would be. But the person that we are is our actual self. The ideal self is that potential person, that PhD, that Sarah Kine clone that you want to be. There you go. And the ought self is the person, you know, the Mother Teresa in your soul that helps all the poor people, distributes food. I wonder if that's what Trump is seeing when he talks about the Blue Apron. He wants to start sending poor people food in boxes, blue boxes, of course,
It's like,
and cut welfare.
it's like how one of the wars they did that with Berlin. That's why his name was the boxes.
Yeah,
World War II.
yeah. That's how we fed the people in Berlin after World War II. They had the Russians blockaded us, and we couldn't get through. They wouldn't let us drive trucks into Berlin. Berlin is in the middle of East Germany, and the Russians wouldn't let us in. So we had to fly supplies in. A discrepancy between actual self and the ideal self or ought self leads to particular emotions. Actual and ideal discrepancies lead to dejection-related emotions. So if your actual self doesn't fit your ideal self very well, then all of a sudden you become depressed and you feel dejected because you're not that person. Actual versus ought discrepancies leads to agitation, related emotions. So you get agitated because you're not doing what Jesus would do, or whatever. The emotional reactions tend to be stronger when related to an important self aspect. So the fact that you're not living up to your own expectations. And some people have expectations that are really tough to maintain. Really tough. And for that reason, this person is setting themselves up for depression. You want to be the President of the United States? Well, there's one of those guys out of 365 million people, and you want to be that one guy? Okay. So what's the probability that's going to happen? 1 out of 365 million. Okay. That's the statistics. Okay. Of course, you have to go to school. You have to do well in school. Can't have any black marks on your record. Okay. So in essence, you're setting yourself up for failure. It's that self-handicapping thing going on again. And so now you're going to be depressed because you're not the person that you ought to be. An individual self-esteem is our overall self-evaluation and sense of self-worth. What am I worth? Who am I? Am I helping people? I mean, is this a good job? How am I doing? You know, that kind of stuff. As a teacher, of course, this happens to me all the time. I think about after class. I think, well, what's Travis thinking? That's what I'm thinking. Of course, he won't talk to me, so I don't know if I've said anything stupid in this class yet. He hasn't told me how dumb I was in class. I know. The only person I'm worried about is Travis. So what's my sense of self-worth? My sense of self-worth is, am I helping people? And some of you guys say nice things about me. Hardly anybody says mean things about me. Not that I can remember anyway. But sometimes I make mistakes. Sometimes I push a little bit too hard, a little bit too far. It happens. Kiana's sitting there going, yeah, it happens like that.
So self-esteem is like kind of thinking like what others think of you too?
No, it's what you think of yourself. It's how you think of yourself. And remember, we lie to ourselves all the time, so you have to be very careful. Your self-esteem sometimes is based on fantasy, all right? I see myself as, I see myself as one thing, and the reality is I'm not that person. Okay, but that's part of my self-esteem, Self-esteem. I'm trying to give you an example I'm thinking of an example that doesn't fit. I used to think that women were attracted to me, that I was cute. Of course, as I got older, I realized and looked in the mirror more frequently. I'm going, oh my God, you're not that attractive, dude. Why would that person be attracted to you?
That is actually a disorder too. Right?
It's it was delusional. It was really delusional. So if somebody looked at me too long, I'm thinking, oh my God, she's gonna flirt with me. She likes me. Stupid stuff like that. Usually at the airports. I don't know why it has to do with airports. This lady from Canada is madly in love with me. Yeah, that's gonna happen. Self-esteem, and now, of course, I'm less delusional than I was before, okay? I tell you guys how ugly I am all the time. And Edison, every damn time I say it, he's in the back going, yep. Thanks, Edison. What a pal. This is a tragedy. Self-esteem influences how we approach and respond to our life challenges. Self-esteem is the evaluation of one's self-concept. Most people regard themselves more positively than they do their peers. The better than average effect, and a good example is driving. We all think that we're better drivers than anybody else. It's like 90% of the people in the United States think they're above average drivers. Well, that's impossible. That's statistically impossible. Now, I know you really are a better driver than everybody else, but there must be so many deluded people out there, right? I travel between here and Albuquerque all the time on 40, isn't that 40? It's 40, right? It's not 80, 80's up in Iowa, okay. And people drive, the truck drivers, you know, sometimes I'm this far away from dying, you know, I'm that far away from dying. But the amazing thing is that not only am I aware of what's going on, but all the people around me are not hitting me with their cars or trucks. You know, they're seeing me. So evidently they're as good a drivers as I am. Maybe I'm such a good driver because I let other people, I don't know, other people aren't killing me or something. People with low self-esteem seem to be more adversely affected by negative life events than people with high self-esteem. Okay, so what if there was a blizzard here? How many of it would all of us survive? Of course, being from Montana, you've been through the most ugly winters in the world. Minus 80 degrees, snow up to the top of the roof. You know you could survive in that environment, but there are people that don't want to. They move to Arizona to get away from the snow.
I couldn't survive if I moved back home.
Sure you could.
I think the Southwest really spoiled me. And
I agree that you're spoiled.
yes.
Oh, no.
I called my wife yesterday. My wife, they just had a blizzard there. They got, I don't know, 9 or 10 inches or whatever, with blowing snow. So we got a really bad driveway. It filled in. My wife plowed through it with her car, and then she plowed back through it with her car. You know, she's trying to open it up by driving on it, not shoveling it or anything like that. That's my wife. But she survived, and I was impressed with her. She really handled it. She's from Georgia. She didn't grow up with snow, you know, but she handled it. She has self-esteem. She's a colonel in the Air Force, by God. She doesn't have to have other people do her work for her. Colonels have their work done for them. They don't do any work themselves. Anyway, so, you know, so what if a tornado hit this area and it knocked your house down? What would you do next? Would you be able to survive? Would you be sitting on your toilet, which is the only chair that's still up is the toilet because it's attached to the ground, and it goes, and the sewage system goes down into the ground. So the toilet will be there. It'll be the only thing that's left. That's the way tornadoes work. It knocks everything down and leaves the toilet, and sometimes the bathtub. But the bathtub picks up. If I could show you, you need to look at this. You need to look at this lady. This is a lady from Oklahoma. So please look at the lady, the tough lady after the tornado. It's really kind of funny because her house is completely destroyed. Her dog has disappeared. Her one companion in life is gone. And this lady's trying to make her cry. This news person's trying to make her cry. And this lady just will not do it. She won't cry. She's an old lady. She's an old lady. 70s or 80s. I don't know how old she is. But then they find her dog, and the dog's still alive. I know. It's really kind of interesting. You need to watch that video. The lady's tough as nails. You know, you want this lady for your neighbor because she's just tough as nails. How am I doing? Okay, self-enhancement and self-verification motives conflict in low self-esteem persons. It appears that self-enhancement motive operates in response to a person's feelings, while self-verification operates in response to a person's thoughts. So we have feelings and we have thoughts, and sometimes they don't agree with one another. This is what I feel, but this is what I'm thinking. The two motives operate on different time courses. The affective route is quicker, but the cognitive route is more persistent. So emotion occurs right away, and you can't control your emotions. But you can control your thoughts, but your thoughts stay with you longer. They're more persistent. This is logic over emotion. When you're a teenager, it's emotion over logic because your amygdala is dominant over your prefrontal cortex. The two motives serve as checks and balances on each other. Only in cases of maladjustment does one motive strongly dominate the other. And that potentially, kid was only 19 years old. He did have a mental illness that we haven't found out about yet. But, his emotions were probably dominant over his thoughts. Well, we can only assume. Or maybe his thoughts agreed with his emotions, and he wanted to kill people. Studies suggest that the self-enhancement motive is weaker in collectivist societies than in the individualist societies, so this conflict may be an artifact of individualist culture. In other words, the person in a collectivist society is thinking about the group, and in an individualist society, they're thinking about themselves. So it may just be an artifact of people in Western Europe. People of Western European domination or whatever. Okay, I'll see you guys next time. I know I didn't get very far. I kept telling stories. I don't know what my problem is. Next time I'll not tell any more stories. I won't tell you about AIM next time.
But it makes the lesson stick.
Are you sure you're not Navajo?